So it's 2 o'clock, and I just want to welcome everybody who is on this WebEx. And also, obviously it's going to be recorded, and then the PowerPoint will be sent out to you as well. So before we start, let me just say that your questions are really important to me. You know that Max and Leslie are the ones who are designated as TSI School Improvement and Turnaround. And I work very closely with them and Rebecca Donaldson in relationship to TSI for English learners. Since it's Title III and my accountability in relationship to being responsible for how funding and practices and strategies are supporting English learners to have a future, then, this is what I take very seriously. So I'm open to any of your questions, as well as comments that you can email me. And it's always best to email me because then we can personalize my response based on, whether we've completed a monitoring visit or we're in the process of doing one or we have a time to schedule it. And I just want to say ahead of time that there are now 2 different kinds of monitoring processes that we do. Typically it ends up being the regular one that it focuses on grade level content, making it accessible because the ESSA feedback that we got from the Department of Ed was pretty clear about the responsibility of the State Education Association to ensuring that in all classrooms, what kind of technical assistance could we provide so that every English learner would have access to grade level content. Their concern wasn't about English language proficiency, which I think is really important to make that distinction. We often get caught up in the assumption that if students aren't fluent in English, then they can't understand content. And as many of us know, that isn't the case. So today's PowerPoint is based on a review from last year, but then really specifics related to the 2019 data for targeted school improvement, which, as you know, the legal obligation is at the individual districts to support the schools. I also like to be very clear about the way in which the design for the Utah Grants Management System and the uploading of the official monitoring report, as well as your response, the self-assessment tool and the application with the questions that help you focus on TSI, are designed to ensure that you prepared for an actual audit. We don't do audits in Title III at all. We monitor the way funds are spent based on legal requirements, the civil rights obligations through the self-assessment tool, and we provide you with those tools so that when the federal government, the Department of Education, comes to the state agency, they're going to select LEAs randomly, whether it's a charter or a district. And so that self-assessment tool is really invaluable because that's the evidence that you have for ensuring that you're following federal law and civil rights law, ESSA and Title III obligations, and you know what that entails. And as a consequence, you're aligning your resources for a strategic allocation of funding, human potential, and understanding of successes in other schools in your districts to collaborate effectively to increase student learning related to academic achievement. So the overview of this is in 3 parts, and that's what I usually do. And the first one is a review of the previous one, and one I think you've heard a while, but sometimes people get a little confused and they end up getting very excited because maybe their WIDA scores, like many of them, because you're focusing on English learners and language education programs that benefit increased language proficiency, that a percentage of annual growth goals are being met, and increased academic competency in relationship to language proficiency in English on the WIDA as a 5 composite has been elevated. But I just want you to remember that that's only 9% of the EL indicator in elementary schools, and then in secondary it's only 6%. The other one is really about growth in elementary schools and proficiency, early literacy as well. And when I say growth and academic achievement, it's in English language arts, mathematics, and science. It's all of those. So we just want to be clear about what we're actually focusing on as far as quality instruction. So that's the first part, which is about just a basic overview and how designation happens for TSI, for English learners, just in general. Then an exemplary Utah Title I school, a distinguished school, and its sustainability over 2 or 3 years. Actually, now I think it's on its 4th year. And some really important work that most of us know because of the work of John Hattie and in the first cohort for accessible assessment capable learners, and now the second cohort. So thanks to Jennifer Thronson and Dr. Donaldson and Dr. Thronson for really creating this opportunity for school teams and district teams to really benefit from some really excellent tools to do observations, which are influencing the way we're changing our observation tool for Title III. And we'll send the new observation tool so that you can become familiar with it, and that you send to all your teachers so they're familiar with it as well. The third part, so one is exemplary school and the work of Hattie, and then the third is really about implications and using data to evaluate effectiveness. Now, the reason this is really important is the way in which funding is allocated should not be left up to a single individual who is the business administrator. Programmatic concerns in relationship to expertise and effectively evaluating program effectiveness based on student outcomes is critical for program people. So it's really important to have this collaborative relationship between ALS, special education, because special needs students outperform English learners in districts by 10, 15, maybe 20%, even though many schools are designated for TSI for students with disabilities. So working together collaboratively and not in silos in curriculum, literacy, mathematics, science, language acquisition, ESL specialists, the ALS department, this is actually really critical in relationship to funding. Sending money back is not an option. Not requesting reimbursements is not an option, especially when the results for students are not actually being produced in the way that we all are committed to. So again, just a simple overview, a graphic that helps us understand the elementary, middle school indicators. English learners, 9%. Growth of the lowest, 25%, which is 17% of that. So this is what we typically call an equity indicator. So if you actually look at the lowest 25% of your students, doesn't matter who they are, what their student group is, or whatever it is, and there's no progress, then evidently and obviously it's going to have an impact on all your students, the culture of the school, as well as specific student groups. And that counts as 17%. So that's, really important. English learner progress is 9%. Then you have proficiency at 37, which is proficiency on the end of level assessments. If you haven't paid attention to the blueprints for RISE from 3 through 8th grade, or in high school, the Aspire blueprints, then you really have to focus on those and see the kind of DOK levels that are being expected, and think about what that actually means for instruction. And then 37% growth, which, when you really focus on growth and are strategic in relationship to the needs of individual students and how you allocate resources, the proficiency levels in those academic areas are going to increase. And then, of course, at the high schools, you see that it's 25% proficiency in those 3 subjects and growth in those 3 subjects. Advanced coursework, the ACT, high school graduation, the growth of the lowest 25% and 6% for English learners. For high schools, when you disaggregate it according to your student group, the ACT percentages are very upsetting and discouraging in relationship to who has access to post-secondary education in a way that could be successful for them, as well as who has access to advanced coursework. The latest counselor's SOAR report, if you haven't seen it, if your counselors haven't seen it, I really suggest that the reports that I'm sending out now have that report in relationship to the different student groups who have access to career and college readiness coursework instead of being tracked into remedial classes. So what does that actually look like for the future of kind of the economic well-being of Utah, the future of our families? So really becoming clear about how this is divided up, and that educators know this. Teachers, instructional coaches, ELD coaches, business administrators, curriculum people, is really very important to strategically focus on the way in which every individual's needs are met. And so indicators for all schools. So I already mentioned the proficiency, which is the SAGE data, grades 3 to 10, in 2018-2019, RISE data from 3 to 8, and then Utah Aspire 9 and 10. Then you have the growth indicators, the English learner progress, which again we want to be very clear, is based on individual, yes, it's based on WIDA, but it's based on the individual English learner's goal for annual growth based on when they entered the system and at what grade level and at what level of English proficiency. So they're all very individualized. That's very important. And then as well as English learners who have achieved proficiency, English proficiency, which is a 5 composite in the WIDA. And then the last, again, as I mentioned before, is growth of the lowest 25%. So these are all the indicators for schools related to accountability. Additional indicators, as I mentioned before, percentage of students graduating within 4 years, 10% of points for graduation awarded to students who graduate within 5 years, ACT, college readiness, advanced coursework. So, which includes CTE, concurrent enrollment, advanced placement, international baccalaureate. If you compare advanced placement, concurrent enrollment, international baccalaureate, and CTE concentrations, you will see the huge gap in relationship to who has access to which courses. And here's the TSI determination. If you have at least 10 students in a group, it's calculated, compares statistically to the bottom 5 cut achievement and growth score. So any student group at or below this cut score will be identified as TSI, or a low-performing student group. It's identified, it's flagged, and those student groups are determined by race, ethnicity, students with disabilities, English learners, economically disadvantaged, and gender. And then, the next question is, okay, well, schools, what happens with schools who are identified? So schools who are identified as TSI that do not improve the performance of the student group that they've been identified for which they were identified within 4 years of identification, then they become a consistently underperforming student group. Any Title I school that is identified as TSI and does not improve the performance of that group is CSI, consistently underperforming student group. So when this initially came out and I spoke with principals, they thought they had plenty of time. Okay, so it really doesn't work that way. Because as soon as you get in TSI, you want to work really strategically with every single school, every single principal, every single teacher, all the families and community, so that the next year you actually show progress and you're above the 5% of the lowest performing groups, right? And because it's always determined as the lowest 5%, that cut scores are always going to be changing. So you have to be very, very conscientious in relationship to annual growth. When we look at the 2019 data, of the 2018 TSI elementary schools, there were only 13 schools that made sufficient progress to make this year's cut. 13. One high school and no middle schools. So, and I know this is new for all of us, and we have to really think strategically in relationship to the quality of instruction. So in 2018, there were 293 schools for the EL student group, 21 high schools, 49 middle schools, and 124 elementary schools. In the 2019 designations, there were additionally 12 high schools with only one high school above the cut. So the 5%, lowest 5% cut score is 0.342, and this particular school, high school, achieved a 3.917. And of course, this always depends on the number of students, but ultimately the question is, if you have 10 students, right, and really the bottom line is you're actually accountable for every single student in the school, whether they're an English learner or not. So it's really critical to think about the way you look at the individual student learning needs. In the 2019 designations, as I mentioned before, 13 of the 124 made 1 year progress. And it was in all different districts, with 38 elementary schools added as a first year in 2019. Now, middle and junior high, originally there were 49 middle schools designated in 2018. In 2019, there are 23 more. So across the state, we saw a pretty large increase in middle and junior high. We'll talk a little bit more about the issues related to middle schools and junior high, and some of the configurations and the critical nature of transitions, effective transitions. Our longitudinal data for English learners shows that if, in fact, English learners who come into our system in elementary school, if they don't reach English proficiency and are supported in access to grade level content by the time they're in 5th and 6th grade, that generally their scores for becoming English proficient go down at middle school. And then in high school they drop even farther. So these transitions are really important, and I would really encourage you to really talk seriously with feeder patterns or networks or whatever it is that you call them. Originally, when we were doing monitoring, we thought that the most logical way to do this was to do it by feeder pattern. And that worked maybe for the first, well, let me put it this way, it didn't really work. So we did it with, the feeder patterns with the highest number of ELs. And then when we ended up looking last year at the TSI scores, the elementary schools were not even connected to some of the feeder schools, and the middle schools were not even connected very well to the high schools. So it was really challenging to think about how to provide support. And that's why we're switching to kind of this more personalized way of supporting. I'm doing that with Murray, a school district, and Park City School District, where we meet with the actual district people, and they do walkthroughs with me, and we have debriefs, and we strategize. And it's just a way of the kind of personalized technical support for specific schools with specific districts. So, growth. So I'm going to focus on growth because this whole issue about a growth mindset is really critical for students who end up having the perception, based on comparing themselves with other students, that they're either not smart enough, this actually starts very early, even in kindergarten, or with kind of deficit self-talk that focuses on things that students can't do, which is also connected to being very specific about what the success criteria is and what it looks like, and where students are in their learning progressions toward that, so that it's not a judgment. So here's an example of a Title I distinguished school. It's in Provo. It's 86% economically disadvantaged, 41% English learners. I used this school last year in the presentation with the 2018 data. Now this is the 2019 data according to academic subjects. Okay, so if you look at this school, you see this school, this is English Language Arts academic growth. Now remember, it's academic growth. So it's growth within the context of accessibility to grade level content. Okay, so this is an English Language Arts, and you see the school is actually outperforming and almost outperforming the district average, but they outperform the state average with English Language Arts. And if you look at the student group, their student groups, you have economically disadvantaged students at 45%, students with disabilities at 46%, and English learners at 39%. Now, again, it's interesting to see the gap between students with disabilities and English learners. And this is persistent. And so then the question for the school might be, okay, so what's happening with the kind of support we're providing with students with disabilities that could actually benefit the English learner population? Here's their mathematics growth, which is also a pattern across the state. Typically, in English Language Arts, English learners do not do as well as they do in mathematics and science for multiple reasons, but it's really important that every school try to figure out why that is. Okay, so in mathematics, the school's growth, 70%. Higher than the district average, higher than the state average. With the students, you see economically disadvantaged is 68%, students with disabilities is 53%, and English learners is 64%. Actually, I think that's the highest in the entire state. So then the question is, what does their mathematics instruction look like? I've seen some of the best math instruction ever in a school in Weber District at a third grade. Totally brilliant. Questions like, so, why is it that this word problem that you've come up with the solution? What's your evidence for your reasoning? And the distinction between, yes, experience is good, and you're using that because you can apply what it is you've done in this in arrays. It was multiplication. And now what is the mathematical reasoning? So, like, very specific and creating wonderful conditions for kids to try things out together, working together, not by themselves, right? Not by themselves as individuals without the academic conversation with mathematical academic language. Here's their science growth. So the school average is 52%, higher than the district, and higher than the state. Economically disadvantaged, 49%, students with disabilities, 50%, and look, English learners, 52% in science. And remember the demographics. This is a school that has nearly 90% poverty and 40% English learners. Here's their equity indicator, which means everybody in the lowest 25%, whether you're an English learner or you're poor or you're Hispanic or whatever it is, that growth indicator is 68%, which is higher than the district average and much higher than the state average. So let's talk a little bit about influences on learning. And remember, you can email me any questions. I'll send this out to you. This will be recorded. We should welcome these challenges because then the value of our profession as educators is elevated because we're committed to each individual child. That's really the point. And we're learning from each other, right? If there's one school in one district with one teacher who has the most extraordinary mathematics, instruction ever, then the question for me always is, okay, so why isn't that like the exemplar? Same thing in social studies. I've seen an amazing sixth grade social studies instruction when kids were working in triads. Just extraordinary for many reasons. So here's the barometers of influence, which I actually found out that John Hattie's wife came up with this as a visual instead of, spreadsheets, which I think is really valuable because I'm going to suggest that if you're stuck on calculations on the spreadsheets and trying to figure what that is, you're wasting your time. The most important thing is not the spreadsheets that you get around TSI, but the school report cards, as what I've previously shown you. So, from a 0.15 to a 0.4, there are typical effects of teachers on students that can be accomplished in a year. So we're talking year. What students could achieve without even any schooling, and an actual decrease of achievement. Of course, what we really want is really the zone of being, it's like Vygotsky's, right? Perfect zone of proximal development, which is the challenge a little bit beyond where the student is. It's that desired effect that ends up pushing the student clear. So the screen just went off, so I don't really know if you're still seeing this. So let me just take a break. Screen's off. I'm still connected because the screen's off. I can't see it.
This TV has a stupid habit of timing out.
Oh, yeah, that must have moved in.
Sorry, it's a stupid TV.
Okay, great.
I gotta fix the color just one second.
Okay. So thanks to Alex and Jerry, we got the television screen back up, but now it's off again.
Oh, we had to unplug and replug.
We set? Okay, great. Thanks, Alex and Jerry. Okay, so again, less than 0.3 is a small effect. From 0.3 to 6 is a medium effect. More than 0.6 is a large effect. The caveat is, a small effect that requires few resources may be more critical than a large one that requires a high level of resources. So you have to think, so this goes back to the way in which we use data to evaluate the effectiveness of how we're spending money. The other thing is, just to be incredibly crystal clear, you can't keep on purchasing paraprofessionals who are not qualified. Even it's a serious civil rights violation to pull kids out of Tier 1 instruction with a paraprofessional, even if it's a so-called program. Okay, remember, ESSA is very clear about evidence-based strategies, some programs, but the impact is always about quality Tier 1 instruction, not pullout. So through principles, instruction provides English learners with opportunities for discipline-specific practices. So why discipline-specific? So, the practices that historians use, the practice that mathematicians use, the practice that poets use. To build a conceptual understanding, these analytical practices, and language competency at the same time. See, at the same time. And that means scaffolding instruction in every subject is really, the critical issue. I've seen some of the best early grade instruction using total physical response, using phonemic awareness, using physical motions, understanding blends, So these things are an advantage, and if there are schools that are doing this well, then we should really spend time looking at the outcomes for students and where that's happening in the district or at your charter school. Standards-aligned instruction. It's, again, grade level appropriate, it's rigorous. And you have really deliberate scaffolds that make content comprehensible and accessible. So silent sustained reading when students don't know how to read, English learners don't know how to read, isn't logical without the appropriate scaffolds, right? It just does not in any way support language acquisition, especially for level 1, level 2, and level 3 to make something accessible. The other question is, the English language arts standards are very clear about writing. They're very clear about the value and the importance of informational text. So, you cannot have the majority of your texts that students are reading literary texts. You have to do paired texts with a focus on information, as well as, literary text as well. So thinking really clearly about what students need, and then the kind of support that should be provided for principals to observe teachers or instructional coaches to spend time looking at student work instead of creating the kinds of formative assessments that reduce contextual language to punctuation or to, subject predicate There's nothing at all in the standards that talks about subjects and predicates. For English learners, the way you learn vocabulary, as well as other students, is embedded in a context with understanding the key clues related to what's being communicated and why you're doing that and how you're reading that for what purpose. So purposeful instruction related to the way in which vocabulary is developed within a context of a text is what's really important. Having a list of vocabulary words on the board that are not connected to any text is not helpful for anybody, or looking them up in the dictionary. So the question is the kinds of tools that you use related to your actual instruction. So here are some examples. The highest one is cognitive task analysis, which includes problem solving, memory, attention, judgment, decision making. So why have you made this decision over this decision to use this language instead of this language? Why is it using this word instead of this word? You have the jigsaw method, and that's DOK level 3 because you're using models and you're creating models. You have the jigsaw model where, and it goes back to this idea of the levels of expertise and competence. So let's the first one is the novice, and then what does that look like, and what does that paper look like? Because you're just learning how to do something. And then you get the feedback that helps you better understand and an exemplar where you need to go next, right? So you're moving from a novice to someone who's more successful, and you know what that looks like and what that paper looks like, and you know how to make it better and talk about how you're making it better. And then, you become an expert, and what that means is you end up having the expertise to be able to communicate what you've learned from producing the kind of quality of work at the grade level so that you can teach others. And that deepens your understanding of how you communicate the way in which working with sustainability, understanding misconceptions and errors, and then correcting that. I saw a really great example of that, and I think it was either Cash or Weber. Might have been Logan. No, it wasn't. It was Uinta. So it was in a wonderful elementary school in Uinta, where there were triads reading with a very strict protocol. There were two students who were mixed, so maybe a novice and then a middle level successful student, and then someone who was the expert who was leading the protocol, and it was triad reading based on very skillful questions related to comprehension and application. I mean, it was really fascinating. It was like one of the most fascinating things I had actually seen that was so incredibly effective. The kids were 100% engaged in their triads. So these are like examples. Scaffolding is very high, planning and prediction, problem solving, not identifying, non-routine problems, testing ideas out, using feedback to self-assess and then adjust. I'm talking about the learner, that we create conditions for the learner to be able to do that. So here's the opportunity to learn. The majority, I would say, of classrooms that our large teams go into, the same recommendation is the same recommendation, which is, besides having content and language objectives and a success criteria, one of the key things is that the kinds of questions that are being asked are very low level. They're what? When? It's all about recounting. Okay, so, and I think I said this last time. I went, and I know this school was actually in Alpine. It was an elementary school, and there were small groups. I think it was a third grade. Might have been even a second. The students actually knew what a DOK-1 was and a DOK-2. They didn't say it that way, but they said, "Oh, that's a level 1 question," and the person in the small group said, "Well, why do you say that?" And the student said, "Oh, because it's just asking about facts, about what happened and, the details that you just take out of the story." So then she said, "Well, how would you make that, a level 2 question?" And then he said something like, "Oh, well, you would ask why. Like, why do you think that this character in this book did it that way?" And that's, very young. Children are being able to identify the kind of quality of question that engages them more deeply in thinking. It's about deeper learning. I saw this so many times and it always ends up being, in elementary schools. This whole idea, even in kindergarten when they're working in pairs and they're doing sequencing of numbers and, the kindergarten teacher's asking, "So why have the two of you decided that? Like, what's your reason?" So this whole idea about designing tasks that require proof and justification, is where we want to go. We want students to be able to do that. And this is what it looks like in the classroom, and I've seen really great examples of this, interacting around key content ideas, always verbal interactions, asking questions. I was at this one school. Actually, it was a charter school, and I think it was might have been a 4th grade, maybe it was a 3rd grade. No, I think it was a 2nd grade. The kids were asking the best questions of the teacher, and the teacher was really wonderful. Well, let's find that out. Another charter school in the high school doing physics and engineering with putting together a turbine. Never answering the question. Whatever the students' questions were, she would respond with, "Well, how can you try that out based on what you're thinking right now?" So these questions and the way in which teachers interact and making conditions for students to make connections, but even between, disciplinary ideas. When the learning tasks are more rigorous and at grade level, then there's a higher level of engagement. It just is. Kids who are passive recipients are not engaged. And as a consequence, they're not learning. And they don't know the reason, and in high schools, they tell me they don't even know why they're there if there's no purpose and what they're being taught is not related to the real world. So here's the greatest effects on student learning. These effects always occur when the teachers become learners of their own teaching and when students become their own teachers. Right? Well, this is the point. You're in a classroom, a student is doing something. I went over yesterday. It was yesterday. I was in Park City. And I was looking at what the student was doing. It was math. And I was asking her what she was doing. And she wrote this she actually could figure out this misconception in relationship to this word problem and then wrote about it, about why the reasoning that was given in the word problem wasn't sufficient to explain the actual answer. Now, see, well, that's incredible. It was a really wonderful, wonderful experience. And, it was a TSI school for ELs that got out of TSI. They actually made, from 2018 to 2019, significant progress. And now they have to do it next year. Right? So being successful in learning from each other is the whole point. And that's why the teaching profession is so magnificent. Where can you wake up and go every day and you're always learning something about yourself, and you're learning about learning, and you're learning with children, right? And the teachers then create this relationship, which Hattie calls, empathy, where the students become their own teachers. Now, we're going to get to some of Hattie's work. So here's teacher clarity. My impact on student learning. Students become their own self-directed teachers. If you look at the chart on the left-hand side, it's teacher attributes and teacher-student relationship. Okay, so it's just like anything else, it's all about relationship, relationship, relationship. So the teacher's estimates of kids' abilities and their achievement has a huge impact on what the students believe about their own abilities, right? I mean, we know that. It's the Pygmalion effect. Teacher credibility with students, which means if the teacher is credible, which means the students believe that the teacher believes in them and believes and understands and will find out if they don't know what they're teaching and how to teach it better, then that increases the power of that relationship. And, of course, it goes back to this idea of teacher clarity around intentions. Students were asked some of the most interesting questions. If in the very beginning there is no clarity of purpose and students don't know why they're doing things, why they're reading something, why it matters, what it looks like when they're successful, it's pretty hard to engage them. They just do it as, that's what they think they have to do. Teacher as facilitator. This one is teacher empathy. How is it that each of us as teachers can empathize with the actual experiences of individual learners without making judgments about them? And then teachers not labeling students. A student-teacher relationship, student rating the quality of teaching. It's all about the way in which we listen from the heart to each student, and we're committed to their success. And what does that look like? And do the students feel that from us? So these are, just pretty much, it's kind of the neuroscience of compassion related to the ability of training oneself to be empathetic, which means you have to take care of yourself as well. So one of the things we're doing in assessment-capable learners, and we're actually going to be integrating into our classroom observations, is something that I did yesterday, is take 3 random students in a class and you just ask them, what are you learning today? Why are you learning this? And how will you know that you learned it? Now, I've done this quite a bit with in other contexts. In one context about 3 years ago, I went to a student and he was copying words out of a dictionary. And so I said, well, why are you doing this? First I said, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm copying the definitions and writing them in a sentence. And I said, well, okay, but so why are you doing it? And he said, well, because I'm going to have a test on it. And I said, okay, but where did you get the words? He said, well, the teacher gave us the words. I said, okay, but where did the words come from? Were they in a text? Were they in a story that you were reading? He said, no, she just put the list on the board. Okay, so you can see, based on the implications of the student not really understanding the importance of the words in relationship to an actual context, doesn't deepen their understanding of the words. So we're going to be collecting data on that. And not as a good or bad, we're just going to be talking, and it's just aggregate data that ends up being in the Title III report. And, it's good for districts and schools to know this. So monitoring and personalized technical assistance. So I did mention the personalized technical assistance that is now being provided. We go visit schools, and then suddenly the principal is saying to the district, and they're emailing me and saying, okay, well, you stopped in and, you gave us this really, helpful feedback with commendations and school-wide recommendations in English language arts, science, and mathematics. So can you come back and do all the subjects? Now, the reason this is valuable is people are asking for something that they know has helped them. The principals are asking for that, right? 2 other districts, same thing. Can you come in and help us specifically in this TSI school? Let's observe together. Let's debrief together. Let's calibrate our observations. This is what authentic collaboration looks like even for students who want to see models of what it means to ask for help, to receive feedback that's valuable, and then to change what they're doing to become more successful. This is just kind of, what it looks like. And so, again, these are indicators that are now integrated into the, because of Hattie's work, and it's teachers communicate learning intentions and success criteria. So these pieces are really important in relationship to being consistent so that students actually understand where they're going, why they're going there, where they are in their process. And that's, again, supporting the growth mindset. So they don't come out with the idea that they're not good enough, right? Or they're not smart enough, or whatever it is. And then, their capacity to sustain effort is not enhanced at all by that kind of self-talk or that emotional affect. Teachers monitor student progress and adjust their instruction. That's a classic one, but the question is, how do we actually do that with support? PLCs are supposed to help us do that, which means the quality of the student work should increase because we're examining it together. We're not making more tests for kids. Students monitor their progress and adjust their own learning. That's what I saw the girl do yesterday in the 6th grade class. So the art of teaching. So what expert teachers do, and again, it's really connected to Hattie's work, visibly learners themselves, and for the purpose of what? So it's for students, right? Challenged by success criteria, developing a range of their own learning strategies, coming up and seeking feedback. There's this one class, it's a high school class, where after an amazing instruction related to an embedded word in a writing assignment that's incredibly relevant to them, they assess themselves after they do editing themselves and then get peer edits, and then they rank themselves as a novice, as competent as an expert. And then the teacher identifies ways that they can ask for support and help so they can get to the next level. See, this is in high school with level 2 English learners from all grade levels. I won't go into all this detail, but it goes back to these mindsets about evaluators of the effect of their teaching on pupils' learning. So the point is you're evaluating the effect as a teacher, and the only way you can do that is you have to ask the students. This high school teacher asks the students all the time. A high school teacher in a charter school. She creates self-reflection and she asks the students, she gives them the opportunity to give her feedback and then the kind of feedback that they need for their continued progress. So they end up becoming deeper thinkers, reflective students, and so this whole idea about you're modeling this value of, continuous learning and feedback and adjustment, deliberate practice, perseverance, enjoying challenges that engages the way in which people learn from each other and with each other, right? That's pretty much the point. This effect size is huge. It goes back to Piaget, and it's this overarching idea from Hattie. The teacher needs to understand where a pupil is in their level of thinking, not who the teacher thinks they are, and then challenge them to go beyond that level. Through this process is cognitive acceleration, in which you're really engaged in the way in which you understand a student's thinking and the way you help them understand their own thinking. So they need instruction provide at the right level, in the right way, based on not any kind of learning styles thing, but it's about learning who the learner is and helping the learner understand how they learn. So it's teaching approaches that make learners think about their learning more explicitly. It's all about this metacognition. When I was a high school teacher, we would do learning tasks, and then I would debrief, and we'd do kind of the simple one, and then I'd have the high school kids lead the debrief for me. And it would be, they would always say, it was kind of funny when you hear them, yeah, we had a great time in this learning activity, this learning task, this learning experience, in the simulation, but the debrief is always way more important than that actual experience, because we're going to ask you how you used to think, and based on this experience, what are you now thinking and why? And so high school students, as well as younger kids, are very good at doing that. I had, again, I think it was either 4th or 5th grade, it might have been 3rd, a student came up to me and introduced himself and said, "Oh, hello, I'm so-and-so. Welcome to our classroom. What can I help you with?" And I asked him what he was learning, and he told me. So this is a way in which, student advocacy for his or her own learning is really incredible. The other one, obviously, is effective feedback. Writing on kids' papers and giving it back to them, or marking something on their paper and giving them back to them. Okay, it has to be clear, purposeful, meaningful. It has to be connected so that there are logical connections with the student's prior knowledge, right? Directed at the right level so students can comprehend it. Supports them in strategies to process the information in a way that students, again, really understand the success criteria, what it means. They're on this learning progression, and so where are they? And it's not good or bad. So the most powerful feedback is provided from the student to the teacher. And so the point is you have to actually ask them. You have to provide all kinds of ways to find out, the impact of your teaching on students, and a range of students, and in a different, range of ways. 3 key principles, and these are from Stanford. They're asset-oriented, which is, if you leverage a student's home language and their cultural assets and their prior knowledge, it's more likely that they'll connect with the new knowledge, the new learning experience, the new information, whatever it happens to be. So framing it that way is really valuable. And also, instruction moves forward by taking into account their English proficiency levels prior to their schooling experience. I think that's the other issue. Oftentimes, students know way more than we give them credit for. And so then how do we figure that out? I'm just going to focus on a few more things. This is the asset orientation, and this is from Hattie. Look, the home environment, parental involvement is a 0.5, and it's not like, it's like creating a welcoming environment, and I saw that over and over and over and over again when I went to schools in Alpine, when I went to schools in Weber, when I went to schools in Cache. It's this environment that is just so incredibly compelling and welcoming. I went to Ellis Elementary. I think it was Ellis Elementary, or it might have been another school. And there were 2, a boy and a girl, and they were greeting us at the door. They were greeting everybody at the door and welcoming them to school. It was just absolutely wonderful. So you see the home environment, you see the school environment. Generalized school effects is a 0.48, which is pretty fascinating because guess what? The parental involvement is higher than that. So you have to really think about the way in which your school environment creates the collective efficacy of teachers who collaborate in a very systematic way. right, and aren't afraid to share their successes, right, instead of what they consider the student's problem or the parent's problem or somebody else's problem. It's what the teachers can do together. And here's a list of all the things. What does this look like in a classroom? We've gone over them. See, students engaged in productive struggle is really important. And you let them know, like, this is great that you're really struggling with this, and what questions does this bring up for you? Or, we used to use a marginalia tool that helped them understand how to interact with a text, and margin notes, and what each margin note could do to help you comprehend more deeply what was going on and what you were reading. So also this whole issue of autonomy, the formative assessment practices. Okay, so these formative assessment practices are not about taking more quizzes by yourself in a corral, one of those things that keep you separate from other people. It's about the kind of work that you're doing and how you understand that your effort makes the work better, and how that effort is strategically used, and how you can talk about how you made your work better, your actual work. Whether, for me, it's the writing is the challenge. Explanatory writing, argumentative writing. How do you explain your thinking based on what you know and who the audience is and for what purpose? Again, these are examples of this, challenge a little bit beyond your skill level. And I like this idea of apprenticing into a content area discussion. So what does that look like in like a fishbowl, where you have a group of students inside and a group of students outside? And what are the ways you're helping them better understand and listen? I saw this in a charter school when there were all refugee students, and they were doing debates on one of the most interesting topics, and you could tell that they had done so much research, and it was about the impact and effect on imperialism, the benefits as well as the challenges. It was in a history class. Again, this is about teaching metacognition, transfer studies, elaboration, reflection, self-questioning, self-regulation. Metacognition is really about how it is we support students in understanding how they're learning, so they can better understand and advocate for themselves when they leave us and go to post-secondary education, or middle schools or high schools. Again, this is neuroscience, affective neuroscience, and English language acquisition. Every child has to be in a safe learning environment without judgment. One amazing, really wonderful charter school teacher said, I learned that it wasn't about getting the students to trust me, it was about me being trustworthy. And because I was trustworthy, then they could trust me. And this is how I showed that. The other big thing that is a huge concern is quality Tier 1 instruction. Okay, so just to be clear, quality Tier 1 instruction is a civil right. And the reason it is you have to ensure that English learners have equitable access to grade-level content, which is well scaffolded. They're not to be pulled out from core instruction, because then the gap, you can see the consequences of that kind of structure, school structure. Interventions that are created in the middle of the day, and oftentimes in secondary schools, middle schools and high schools, where there's 25 minutes or 30 minutes in the middle of a day, and kids are given passes or notes or whatever, however they organize it, and there are some kids that go to the library and do whatever, and there are other kids who are assigned to remediation. There is really no evidence for that being effective unless you actually evaluate the impact of using a master schedule that way. So ultimately that ends up being the question. Whatever practices that you use, However it's funded, you have to continually evaluate the effectiveness of that based on the outcomes for your students, based on their learning needs. And so that means you have to get to know your students really well. A big question is, how are individual student reports from multiple sources, how are they used to inform instruction? We have some of the best individual student reports in the nation. How are those used? It's longitudinal, as well as based on literacy, speaking and reading and writing, based on the WIDA data, and then projecting, goals for the students. So focusing on that will help you understand the language goals for your students. Based on, the individualized way in which accountability for English learners and their growth goals, meeting their growth goals, will be helped. So how do you use that at grade level meetings? Policy decisions to allocate resources to increase teacher effectiveness. Teachers are treasures, right? And learning together in a learning community with the principal is really critical. So it should be a welcoming, positive environment for everyone. So what do you need to do? So evaluate the effectiveness of language programs based on student outcome data in relationship to students who are making progress, growth in English language arts, mathematics, and science. And if one of those subjects is doing, a rock star job, then you have to find out what's going on in your school with those teachers. And your instruction has to be aligned to the blueprints of the assessments. It has to be aligned to the core standards. So your teachers, you have to really work hard in knowing what those core standards are, as well as the blueprints for the final assessment. An example from Weber Elementary, I saw the best student study team I'd ever seen in my life, facilitated by a principal. That's a TSI school for EL, and the way in which they didn't go to the data instantly at all. They went to the data last. So what did they do first? The team members described the interactions of the student with other students and teachers in the previous grade and in the current grade, and support people. And then they also did this most amazing thing in relationship to understanding and doing home visits, so they really understand the context of the family without making it a deficit issue at all. Really understanding the family's perspective, the mother's in particular, was a single mother. And then at the very end, the principal said to everybody, okay, so this is a student learning English. Now, let's be really clear. Is this a special needs issue? And everybody in the group said no. And then they said why. And then they started looking at the data and planning interventions to support the student. So this was an open, honest, strategic, brilliantly insightful process that was all about growth. Understanding the student, his social-emotional well-being, by describing interactions in a very insightful and astute way, and then engaging the family through home visits as well as understanding the situation personally. So, brilliant. A model that should probably be disseminated across, and I did tell Weber that this was important and was impressive. So, questions and comments, I'm going to send this PowerPoint out. Please email me. The phone messages are okay, but the problem is if I'm home or, there's something urgent, I don't do the phone messages, but I'll respond to email as soon as I see them on my phone. So I just want to thank you. I want to tell you what a privilege it is to be in classrooms and see some of the most amazing instruction I've ever seen in my life. Some of the best conversations with district principals and superintendencies, Alpine's debriefing with their team, their district teams, and their administrators like Jordan's and like Weber's was really the most exceptionally wonderful, thoughtful, reflective, listening, considerate groups of people who are professionals that I've ever worked with. So these are really great opportunities to think about your needs and then reaching out in a way that's very strategic and helpful. So thank you so much for the privilege of working with you. And let's just take this as a challenge and work together for, each child who depends on us to do our job and to love them with no conditions and their families. Thanks so much.